My husband secretly transferred his lifelong savings to his mother's account, claiming just in case we ever divorced despite me warning him several times. Now he's losing it because we're actually getting divorced and he's still got nothing left because his mommy dear refuses to acknowledge ever taking his money. They always say hindsight is 20/20, but I don't think I was ever truly blind, just cautious with my hope, maybe too generous with my patience. From the beginning, I knew my husband had a close relationship with his mom. Some people find it sweet. A man who calls his mom regularly, takes her to brunch on Sundays, buys her little things just because. But this wasn't that. This wasn't soft sentiment. This was something else entirely. He'd talk about her like she was the gold standard for every woman. The way she cooked, the way she managed money, the way she always knew what to do when things got tough. At first, I thought it was just his way of trying to be affectionate, honoring the person who raised him. But then things started to stack, not in dramatic movie-style ways, just quiet little moments that left a bad taste in my mouth. Like when he hesitated to add me to the house deed even though we bought it together, or when he refused to merge our bank accounts saying it was easier to keep things separate. He said he trusted me, that it had nothing to do with me, and that his mom had always taught him it was smarter this way, just in case. Just in case. I remember how I felt the first time he said those words. We were maybe 2 years into the marriage, sitting in the car after dinner with his family. I'd made an offhand comment about how some friends were getting a joint savings account together for a vacation fund, something light, casual. He said it so matter-of-factly. We probably shouldn't combine finances like that, just in case. I asked what he meant and he shrugged. Said it was always good to be prepared if things didn't work out. He wasn't saying he expected things to happen, just that being smart wasn't the same as being pessimistic. I let it go at the time, told myself it wasn't worth fighting over, that people have different comfort levels when it comes to money, but it sat in the back of my mind like a loose nail on the floorboard. Every so often I'd step on it. There were other things too. His mother always asked weirdly specific questions when she visited about our mortgage interest rates, my salary, whether I had any debts in my name. She never asked in a hostile way, always under the guise of small talk. But there was a pattern, one I couldn't ignore. She wasn't just being nosy. She was gathering data. And the more I noticed it, the more it made my skin crawl. I brought it up once, asked him if he thought it was strange how much financial curiosity she had about our household. He waved it off. She said she was just being a mom, that she cared. And when I told him it made me uncomfortable, he got defensive. Said I was reading into things that I always had to be on guard, always assuming the worst. That stuck with me too. Because no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, part of me did feel on guard. Not paranoid, just aware that something didn't feel right. Like, I was living with someone who already had one foot out the door. Or maybe worse, someone who was prepared for me to be the one who left. It wasn't like he didn't show affection, he did. He remembered my favorite meals. He left me sticky notes on bad days. He laughed at my terrible jokes. But underneath all that was this layer of planning, backup plans, emergency exits, and it wasn't like I was demanding he hand over his wallet and trust me blindly. I'm not a fool. I built my own career. I had my own savings. I wasn't asking for a piggy bank. I just wanted to feel like we were on the same side. But every financial conversation circled back to the same sentiment: independence, what ifs, and his mother's endless advice about being ready for any outcome. The real kicker? I gave him a warning. Not the dramatic, shouty kind, a quiet one. One night after dinner, I told him very plainly that if he ever prioritized his mother's paranoia over our partnership again, really chose her worldwide over mine, I take that as him choosing his future without me. He said I was being unfair, said I didn't understand what it was like to grow up around instability, that his mom had built everything she had from the ground up after his dad bailed on them, and that all her advice came from scars I couldn't see. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was scarred. But that didn't give her the right to map her trauma onto our marriage, and it didn't give him the right to follow her lead, like I was just a temporary detour in his life. I should have pressed harder then. I should have taken his reaction as the warning it really was, but I didn't. Instead, I swallowed the feeling, the knot in my stomach, the tightness in my chest, and told myself it would all settle once we were on firmer ground. Except we never were. And deep down, I think he liked it that way because in his mind, it meant less risk, less vulnerability, less chance of losing if things ever went sideways. What he didn't realize was that by preparing so hard not to lose, he lost me anyway. And the worst part? He wouldn't even realize it until it was too late. Update 1, I found a receipt. A stray paper lodged inside a hardcover book I picked off the shelf in the guest room while cleaning. I was wiping the bookshelf, flipping through pages out of habit when it fell into my lap, a printed transfer receipt from his bank dated 6 months prior. The amount? Nearly his entire savings transferred to an account under his mother's name. It felt like something inside my chest buckled. I stared at the paper, willing it to make sense, convincing myself it had to be a misunderstanding, a typo, maybe a co-owned emergency fund, something he forgot to mention. But even before I opened my laptop and started pulling up statements, I already knew what I'd find. He had cleared out his savings. Not a cent left. The transaction trail was clean, deliberate, and quiet. No joint accounts, no conversation, just gone. I didn't confront him right away. I needed a full picture. I logged into every portal, downloaded every statement, every time-stamped receipt, printed and highlighted until my dining table looked like an audit zone. There was no mistake. He had planned this meticulously incremental withdrawals followed by one final bold transfer. That night, he came home humming like nothing had changed. Dropped his keys in the ball, kissed my cheek, complained about traffic, made dinner plans, all while I sat on the couch staring at him like he was a stranger. I waited until after dinner. I didn't want him to twist it into another one of those you ruin the evening kind of arguments. When we were in the living room, lights dim, TV humming low, I slid the folder across the coffee table towards him. His eyes narrowed. He asked what it was. I told him to open it. He did quietly, slowly. His eyes scanned the top page and I watched the color shift in his face. Not panic. Just that slight tightening around his mouth, like a child caught halfway through stealing candy, but still thinking he could lie his way out of it. He asked where I got it. I told him it didn't matter. He asked why I was snooping through his things. I asked if he was seriously trying to turn this around on me. If he actually thought the real crime here was my curiosity, not the fact that he had transferred our future into an account I had zero access to. He said it wasn't our future, it was his savings. I stared at him, flawed. I reminded him we'd been married for 5 years, that everything we were building, our mortgage, our life plans, the supposed retirement trips we used to dream about, they all depended on us acting as a team. That he had lied by omission. He said it wasn't lying, he just didn't share everything. I laughed. I couldn't help it. A bitter, exhausted laugh. Then I asked him why he did it, why he thought moving every cent into his mother's account behind my back was okay. He didn't even hesitate. He said it was precautionary. Just in case we divorced, I went still. He said it like it was completely normal, like people should always be prepared for their marriages to fail, like I should have been impressed by how proactive he was. I reminded him I had warned him, told him once before, that if he ever made a decision that showed he was planning to protect himself instead of trust us, it would be the death of this marriage. He shrugged, said he didn't mean anything by it, that his mom told him it was just being smart, that it wasn't like I'd earned that money or was entitled to it. He said it was his nest egg from before we got married, and it continued on after and he didn't want to risk losing it. I asked why he even married me if he had already decided I was a risk. He said everyone prepares for the worst, that it didn't mean he didn't love me. This was the moment I realized something brutal. Love to him had always come with clauses, disclaimers, fire exits. There was never a version of this relationship where he wasn't already halfway out the door with an emergency bag packed. He kept trying to justify it, said things like, I didn't know how you'd react. It's not like I spent it. I could have told you eventually. I asked him what the plan was if we never divorced. Would he just leave it there forever and let his mother control our financial safety net? He didn't answer. I pressed harder. I asked if he thought she would actually give it back if something happened to him, if we needed it for medical emergencies, a down payment on the second home, retirement. He said, of course she would. I asked him if he got that in writing. He blinked. I asked if the account was jointly held, if his name was even on it. He said no. I told him flat out that it wasn't his money anymore. It was a gift, and he had no legal standing to reclaim it. He tried to backpedal then, said he'd talk to her and have it transferred back, said it was just temporary. I stood up and told him not to bother because it wasn't just about the money, it was about trust. About the fact that he looked at me, someone who had stood by him, supported him, made sacrifices with him, and decided I was a financial threat that needed to be planned for behind my back. He said I was being overly dramatic. I told him he could go to sleep at his mother's house then, since that's where all his loyalty clearly resided. And I went to bed alone, but I didn't cry. I just lay there wide awake, knowing his marriage had already ended. He just hadn't caught up to the fact yet. Update 2. After that night, I stopped talking to him like we were married. I still spoke. I wasn't childish about it. But something changed. He noticed it too. The way I responded to him with short nods instead of full thoughts. The way I stopped waiting for him to come home from work or asking about his day or even bothering to sit next to him on the couch. We weren't arguing, we were done. Quietly, flatly done. He thought I needed time, I didn't. What I needed was a plan, and I wasn't going to make the same mistake he did, assuming trust could coexist with secrets. I called a lawyer the very next day, took an early lunch from work, sat in my car with the engine off, and had one of the most sobering 45 conversations of my life. I laid it all out: the secret transfer, the lack of transparency, the gaslighting. My lawyer didn't flinch. She'd heard it before. Not this exact story, but the pattern. The man who squirreled away money just in case. And then active shocked when the woman he distrusted finally called it quits. She said something that stuck with me. People like your husband don't prepare for divorce because they think it's inevitable. They do it because deep down they know they're the problem. That hit hard, but it made things clearer. We had a joint mortgage, a car in both our names, some furniture, and a few small investments. I had my own savings, nothing massive, but enough to stand on. He'd spent years carefully isolating his finances, and now that structure would work beautifully in my favor. He didn't realize it yet. That weekend, I told him we needed to talk. He came into the kitchen like we were going to hash out some misunderstanding. He actually looked relieved, as if he thought I was finally over it and we were going to get back to the normal he was used to. I told him I was filing for divorce. He blinked, laughed like I was joking. I repeated it calmly. His face shifted from confusion to disbelief, to anger in seconds. He said I was being irrational, that I was trying to punish him for being smart, that I was letting my emotions ruin a perfectly good marriage. I didn't respond. He paced the kitchen saying things like, I was throwing everything away, that I was acting impulsively, that we could go to counseling if I really needed to feel heard. I told him I didn't need to feel heard anymore, I needed to be free. He said his mom was right about me. That was the last thing he said before slamming the door and disappearing for the rest of the night. I took a deep breath, texted my lawyer to proceed with the paperwork, and slept like a stone. Over the next few weeks, I moved in silence. I updated my personal bank info, transferred my paycheck deposit into a solo account, removed my name from any unnecessary shared utilities. I even made a quiet trip to a storage unit and began boxing things that were mine. Sentimental items, irreplaceable things I didn't want to leave behind. He kept trying to talk like we were still figuring things out. 1 minute cold, the next warm. He brought home takeout from my favorite place one night, tried to act like none of this was serious, like he could win me back by pretending he hadn't dug a chasm between us that couldn't be patched. I told him again I was serious. That's when the panic really began. He begged to talk about a plan, said we could maybe undo the transfer, he'd call his mom, have her send the money back, we could start over. I didn't even entertain it because the issue wasn't the money anymore. It was that he had the audacity to protect himself against me, to plan an escape while assuming I would stay loyal, trusting and blind. That I would never leave even if he left me emotionally long ago. He could have just asked me for a prenup instead of whatever this was. He started saying I was being cruel, I was overreacting, I was teaching him a lesson. I didn't bother correcting him. I let him think this was punishment if that made it easier for him to process. I knew the truth. It wasn't retaliating. I was reclaiming peace. I wanted to be free of his paranoia, and I was setting him free too. The lawyer served him the papers 3 weeks later. He read them at the dining table while I quietly poured coffee and left the room. I didn't need to see the tantrum. I already knew how it would go. I heard the chair slam back, the paper crumble, the faint muffled curse as he paced in the kitchen, finally understanding this wasn't a bluff, it was real. He followed me into the hallway holding the papers in his hands like they were a personal betrayal. He said he couldn't believe I'd actually go this far. I asked him if he remembered the moment he wired his money to his mom. He said it wasn't the same thing. I told him it was exactly the same thing. He planned for the end. I just decided to meet him there. Update 3. 2 days after the papers were served, he called his mother. I didn't hear the whole conversation. I wasn't eavesdropping. But he paced up and down the hallway like a caged animal, talking low at first and then louder, sharp with frustration. A few phrases drifted through the closed office door. You said it was temporary. I need that money now. No, I'm not joking. There was a pause. Then his voice stunned. What do you mean it's gone? I didn't need to hear anything else. I went about my evening, folded laundry, played something light on TV in the background. I'd seen this coming, not because I had any inside knowledge, but because this was exactly how his mother operated. She was all smiles, all softness until you wanted something back. Then suddenly her memory would fade, her generosity would expire. When he finally emerged, he looked shaken, pale. His mouth opened like he wanted to say something, but instead he just sat on the couch and stared at the floor. I didn't ask. He told me anyway that she wouldn't give it back, that she said it had been a gift, not a holding favor, that she'd use some of it for renovations and relocation, the rest into things she couldn't exactly undo. Her words, not mine. She hadn't even denied it. She simply redefined the story in her favor. He looked at me like he expected sympathy or maybe some reassurance that she'd come around, that I'd help him sort it out. I offered none. Instead, I reminded him, "You gave it away." He said he didn't think she'd do this. I asked him what made him think she was loyal to him when her only loyalty had ever been to control. He muttered something about talking to a lawyer. I told him flatly it wouldn't matter. There was no written agreement, no legal documentation, no designation of the money being held in trust. She could spend it, sit on it, shred the proof, and legally, he'd have no leg to stand on. He knew it too, and now so did I. This man who had prepared so meticulously to win in a divorce had lost everything the moment he handed his power over to someone who saw him, not as a son, but as a pawn. The fallout came quick. His attempts to recover the money were laughable. He tried pleading and then guilt-tripping, claimed it was for his future, that she'd ruined his safety net. She told him coldly that he had no one to blame but himself, that maybe if he hadn't let his wife push him into a corner, he wouldn't be in this mess. That if he hadn't filed for divorce, maybe they could have worked something out. He told her I filed, not him. She said it didn't matter, that the marriage clearly wasn't solid and she wasn't about to return something he voluntarily handed over on shaky terms. The money was gone, whether it sat in her account or already filtered out into luxury renovations and new jewelry and a backup fund for his golden child younger sister, it was never coming back. He started snapping at me more, but with less bite each time, almost like he was trying to provoke a fight he didn't have the energy to finish. I didn't take the bait. I cooked what I needed, washed what I used, slept when I felt like it. The house wasn't tense. It was hollow. Every now and then, I'd catch him staring at me like he wanted to rewind everything, like the panic was settling into grief, like he'd finally understood this wasn't something he could fix with flowers or a half-hearted apology. Not this time. The real kicker, my lawyer confirmed what he didn't want to hear, that because he transferred the funds before the divorce to a third party voluntarily, it was no longer considered a marital asset. He couldn't claim the money as part of our division of property. He protected it so well that now even the courts couldn't help him. Meanwhile, I walked away with what was legally mine, my share of our joint assets, my car and every penny of my personal savings that I had kept separate since the beginning. I hadn't done it out of mistrust. I'd done it because I was raised by a mother who told me to never rely on someone who flinches at the word we. And now it was the reason I didn't have to panic when things burned down. He had to sell the house or return the money I had put into it. It was his choice. One evening, he asked me quietly, almost timidly, if I'd ever considered calling it off if I still saw a future. I didn't respond right away. He said he still loved me, that maybe this whole thing had been a wake-up call, that he could go to therapy, that we could start fresh, that the money wasn't what mattered, not the money itself. But the fact that he looked at me, the woman who stood by him for years and planned his escape before I ever gave him a reason to, that's when I voiced discomfort. Instead of adjusting, he doubled down. Then he bet everything on me never leaving and lost the moment I did. He said I was being cold. I said I was being honest. Then I got up and left the room. Because there's no comfort in being the backup plan to someone who thinks you'll never wake up. And he'd already done enough damage for both of us. Edit. I had invested my money into that house too. Why should I move out? Update 4. The divorce was finalized on a Friday morning. I didn't dress up for it. I wore jeans, black tee, hair tied up. I didn't feel the need to mark the occasion with anything symbolic or dramatic. The drama had already paused. Now it was just paperwork, a signature, a stamp, a quiet sharp goodbye that he didn't get to control. He didn't look at me once during the session, not directly at least, but I could feel the heat coming off him from across the table, the resentment, the humiliation, the quiet disbelief that this was actually happening, that I had followed through, and that I hadn't begged, hadn't cried, hadn't second-guessed my choice even once. When the judge confirmed that everything was settled and finalized, he still tried one last time, right there in the hallway outside the courtroom, voice low and rushed like he thought this was his window. He asked if we could talk, said he just wanted to understand how we got here. I told him we both already knew how. He said it wasn't fear, that he didn't deserve to be punished this way. That line made me pause. I turned to him and told him very calmly that this wasn't punishment. It was consequence. The result of building a life with someone who had already decided I wasn't permanent. He tried to smile then like he was attempting one of those warm familiar glances that used to soften my anger. It didn't work. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt distanced, like I was looking at someone I once knew through a fogged-up window, a version of a man I used to trust. And the man standing in front of me now, he wasn't even holding on to me. He was holding on to the idea of what I gave him: stability, a home, a foundation he thought I would never crack. But I was never going to carry his weight again, so I walked away. It didn't take long for the meltdown to follow. About 2 weeks later, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, and then I played it back. It was his voice, tired, strained, almost raspy. He said he'd made a huge mistake, that he couldn't sleep, that everything was slipping out of his hands, and he didn't know how to stop it, that his mother wouldn't return his calls anymore, that she was busy, or traveling, or sick, depending on which excuse she felt like spinning that week. I listened to it once, deleted it, and blocked the number. But the updates kept coming through others. A mutual friend texted me, said he'd quit his job after a public outburst in a staff meeting, and rumor had it he tried to borrow money from coworkers under the table. Another friend mentioned he'd been seen at his mother's place arguing outside her gate, yelling that she owed him everything and that he was ruined because of her, but she didn't let him in. Apparently she was done with him too, and I wasn't surprised because for people like her, loyalty only exists as long as you're useful. And now that his usefulness had expired, his marriage gone, his pride gone, his money certainly gone, she had nothing left to protect. She hadn't just spent the money, she'd spent him. And now he was exactly where he put me, alone, disoriented, and trying to make sense of the fact that people he thought would always be there had finally walked away. The funny thing was I didn't feel victorious. This wasn't some revenge arc where I pumped my fists and laughed while he crashed and burned. It was quieter than that. I felt peace. I felt like I'd finally stepped out of a house that had been filling with smoke for years, and I'd been holding my breath the entire time, convinced it was just fog. So we could fix it if we just opened more windows, but it was never fog. It was fire, and he had the match in his hand the entire time. What I'd mistaken for foresight, the separate accounts, the passive-aggressive just-in-case plans, the subtle undermining, it was all just a man who didn't trust anyone because he had learned not to trust himself. And when it came down to it, the person he feared losing most wasn't me. It was the safety net I provided, the love he could fall into without earning, the home he didn't have to protect because he assumed I'd always guard it for both of us. He gambled everything on the idea that I'd never leave. And now he had nothing to fall back on. Not his mother, not his savings, not me, just an empty house, some scattered pride and a brutal understanding that you can't outrun the consequences of treating your partner like a liability. A few months later, I moved to a smaller place at the edge of town. Clean lines, big windows, quiet. I filled it with plants, got a cat, started hosting friends again, people who felt light and who didn't make me feel like I had to watch my back. There were moments sometimes late at night where I'd remember the early versions of him before the mistrust, before the quiet cruelty, and I'd feel a flicker of something soft, not longing, just memory. Then I'd look around and realize I was safe and let it go because there's no joy in being with someone who only saw you as a contingency plan and no regret in becoming the chapter they didn't think you'd ever close.